playing field. It's about what you have on them in order to protect yourself.
I was first raped violently.
Well, you're finished. You'll never play football again.
Obviously, shoe contracts worth $400,000 or $500,000.
Morals and ethics don't exist above and beyond the society that they're a part of.
Nowadays, kids are faced with the choice of do you want a couple $1 million or your college degree?
Sport is a metaphor for what goes on in the real world.
What are the ethics and management issues associated with racially based stereotypes in sports? The reality of African American success in sports competition disproves some racial stereotypes. Racially based abhorrent claims made by whites have been clearly demonstrated to be untrue. In sport, because of the opportunity for equal and open competition, anyone can see that black athletes display exemplary individual efforts, leadership, and teamwork, which not only equals, but in many cases exceed the performances of white athletes. Some now argue that sports success has harmed the overall societal interests of African Americans because success in sports contributes to yet another stereotype, the stereotype that athletics is the only area of interest or accomplishment for black people. This stereotype, it is argued, results in less acceptance and less opportunity for people of color in society. Do blacks lose by winning in sports? We discussed these issues at the Summit, the first international conference on ethics in sports. Let's revisit the Summit and join in on the discussion.
Because of the public perception that blacks have not contributed anything to American life, I think that really makes it necessary for people to understand what blacks actually have contributed to American life and why they are here and what they did while they were here. There's such a distortion of what that really is that people make assumptions and deal with stereotypes based on things that aren't true.
Do African Americans lose by winning big? African Americans have been asking themselves that question for about 100 years, although I don't think this is well known. A very important historical factor is the thinking that developed in the 20s and the 30s among some of the leaders of the NAACP, the Urban League, when the idea was promulgated that performing on the field, on the track, showing the white man that the black man could excel would be a very great propaganda value for converting the racist thinking of whites in the United States. I would argue that this notion of positive racial social engineering through demonstrating African American competence, courage, willpower, persistence, sense of tactics, as demonstrated in sports, is and remains an enormously powerful legacy. It remains, I think, the framework for thinking about whether black people win or lose in this society by performing. I think that this has become an outdated view, and I think part of the confusion that we experience in assessing the positive and negative sides of the ledger respectively derives from the fact that there is still a tendency to evaluate the value of black athletic excellence in terms that were cast back in the 20s or a generation later during the enormously important Jackie Robinson episode at the beginning of the Civil Rights period.
I'm reminded of, and we've talked a few different times with a few different people since I've been here about Ali, and I'm reminded of this old clip of Ali and Frazier on the Mike Douglas show. Some of you may remember that. And Douglas asked the two of them, well, would you let your son be a boxer? And Frazier jumps right up and says, oh yeah, it's been good for me, a good game for me, good game for my son. And Ali, in the way that only Ali could say it, says, Frazier, you're a fool. I'd never let my son be involved in this game. I want my son to be an engineer, a lawyer, and went through a whole long list of other types of options. But certainly what Frazier was expressing was, this is the opportunity that I see. this is the opportunity that's been available for me. And as broadly as he was able to see at that moment, sports was the world of opportunity. So in the sense of is it a bad idea and are the opportunities too narrowly focused, I think that's absolutely correct.
The initiative to which Jackie Robinson contributed heroically, as everybody agrees, at least on the legal level, that was completed. Those sorts of barriers are not there any longer for African American athletes to break. So the question remains, what remains to be done? There's an enormous amount that remains to be done. I don't think athletes of any ethnicity are the people to do it, frankly. But the kind of leverage that Jackie Robinson had, morally and politically, is simply no longer there.
I know I've had an experience myself where I was in an organization coming out of sports and came in and was talking about introducing a new product in this business. And I can feel that the idea was not taken very seriously, probably because of this imagery that's out there that's, well, that's just a old black athlete, he doesn't know anything, that type of thing. I don't know it's that way. All I know is that it did not get a response, only to discover 2-3 years later that the same idea that I had became a reality in another similar organization. You have to tell our young people that they are more than just great athletes.
In 1939, 6,000 black doctors petitioned the American Medical Association for admission. The AMA said, get lost. Okay, that's the sort of experience that has, as Harry Edwards pointed out, has channeled such a disproportionate amount of talent, time, and energy into the entertainment fields, which include sports. The sports world that is run by the commercial leagues, that is run by Nike, which has about 1,000 times more influence on the image of the African American than the NAACP does, that this is an image factory. It is bad for America. I believe it is extra bad for African Americans who do not need any more identification with their bodies. A bad racist cultural habit that developed during slavery, our marinating in endless, countless images of black athleticism 365 days a year. I defy you to argue otherwise, watching television, reading Sports Illustrated, all these other magazines. It simply continues the athleticizing of the humanity of an entire so-called race of people. If you think this image factory is limited to the United States, that is not true. That the market for racialized athletic imagery is now as global as CNN and the globalizing NBA. Here, for example, is a full-page ad for a new conference center that opened a few months ago in Munich. This comes from the German paper that I subscribe to. And how is America represented? This is arguably this is the best newspaper in the world, by my opinion, although this sorts of imagery does not confirm my diagnosis. The white Americans, we have two women here. Technology, as usual, African Americans are cut out of technology action. Nice-looking white woman dressed in an astronaut suit. The white woman on the right is sort of, a Western geisha girl or something. She's just there for sex appeal. The African American is represented by an actor impersonating Dennis Rodman. Okay, this is, I have a whole collection of German images of blackness.
Hopefully we will get to the point where you can look at a person and try to praise that person based on who they are rather than what stereotypical group that they supposedly come from. We really need to get to that. We really need to see in each American citizen the potential to be a great citizen rather than an assumption that this person is a problem.
The question, do blacks lose by winning at sports, can be framed within the broader historical and societal context where the issue seems to be more about economic and political interests, about money and power, than about genetics and psychology. Professor John Hoberman, author of Darwin's Athletes, How Sport Has Damaged Black America and Preserved the Myth of Race, noted that in the 1920s and 1930s, the NAACP wanted to use African American sports success to change racist thinking by whites. He believes that civil rights legislation in the 1960s completed the legal side of the race initiative in sports, in which Jackie Robinson played a significant role. Though enormous amounts of work needs to be done, athletes may not be the ones to do it, because commercial sports advertising, not the NAACP or the athletes themselves, now controls the dominant image of African Americans and presents them as exceptional athletes, rather than as members of the community of equal citizens. Professor Ken Shropshire, author of Black and White, Race and Sport in America, and acting director of the African American Studies program at the University of Pennsylvania, argues that Americans are too focused on sports and that even Muhammad Ali wanted his son not to be an athlete. He wanted his son to be an engineer, lawyer, or pursue any of a number of other careers. He stresses that sports opportunities are too narrowly focused and that we must see the opportunities more broadly. Leroy Selman, member of the National Football Hall of Fame and Associate Athletic Director at the University of South Florida, presented his personal experience, which reinforces the claim that many people often do not take athletes seriously in business, and that African American youth must realize that they are more than just athletes. Kareem Abduhl-Jabbar, author of Black Profiles in Courage and member of the National Basketball Association Hall of Fame, argues that there is a public perception that African Americans have not contributed to American life, and that history shows this claim to be not true. He emphasized that we must evaluate each individual on their individual character, not by racial stereotypes. What are the opportunities and obligations of athletes, team owners, schools, colleges, and universities with respect to racial stereotypes in sports? What are the facts, values, rights, and responsibilities that should be considered in evaluating racial stereotypes?
The key message in my book is that black people have made significant contributions to what makes America great. And if we can acknowledge that and let the world and the nation understand that black people have been here and done something positive, I think it will go a long way to improving a lot of things that need to be improved in our nation.
Let's keep track of the way people are portrayed. We are beginning to see in newspaper and magazine advertising black men dressed in business suits with laptops. Okay, that's just starting. I have never seen an airline ad featuring an African-American pilot. Never. I always ask people about that, because one of the things I do in the book is I talk about the history of aviation racism, which I think is a key, because it is so symbolic of technological competence. I've never seen, I have been flown across the Atlantic by a black man dressed in a magnificent, he looked like an admiral, and he radiated the kind of leadership capacity that whites have traditionally denied black men. They're there in very small numbers, but the airlines don't dare to put them on the cover of the magazine. The old Victorian law of compensation that says that human beings pay in brain for what they have in brawn is still operative as a cultural logic. That the dumb jock stereotype that originated as a non-racialized stereotype is still with us. It is still available to be applied to black men in particular, who are going to bear the double burden of too much muscle and the fact of being black.
I don't have a hoop dreams view of black America. I don't see every family sitting around saying, who's going to make it out of here by playing basketball? It certainly happens, but I think that is just as inappropriate as the families that push their daughters and sons to be tennis players, figure skaters. It's just as problematic as those primarily white young men that go to play minor league baseball and don't make it, making $300, $500, $600 a month, and end up working at 7-Elevens and the like. So it is an American problem that there's too much focus on sports. I think that if you want to look at how do you refocus this, and this goes back to what some of our speakers have said all along. Well, if you enjoy this enterprise so much, recognize it as what it is. It's at one count, it's a $350 to $500 billion a year business. And there are certainly other opportunities beyond just playing on the field that you are foolish, and you've all heard the statistics, to think that you're going to get a job when the odds are 1 in 10,000, 1 in 12,000, that you can become a professional athlete depending on what sport you're looking at. The opportunities that are exciting to me are to purchase a franchise for $10 million and then later sell it for $200 million. The opportunities that are exciting for me are to receive $17.6 billion to broadcast this property that you've created to broadcast this game. And where the inequities occur, and John mentioned the importance of these athletes using leverage and the absence of the Jackie Robinson type leverage, well, we do have athletes that are in a position to use leverage in a different sort of way, and that's the economic leverage. The economic leverage to say, rather than to say, I won't come back unless Phil Jackson is the coach, rather than to say, I'm not going to come back unless Jeff Van Gundy is my coach, is to say, I don't want to play for a team as a free agent. I won't go anywhere that doesn't have a large percentage of African Americans in the front office. I won't go play in a city that constructs a facility and doesn't have African Americans involved in that construction process. So it's a tremendous economic moment that exists for those that do choose to participate in sports. But the important message, and I don't think any of us disagree on the panel on this, is that there is too much focus on the idea of trying to be the next Michael Jordan or trying to be the superior athlete. But I don't think, and this is why Bob Lipset is up here, I think it is a question, and John appropriately showed some media images of what's out there. It's all over the place, and it's difficult to address and to fight the media image of this is the way out. This is the most successful route that you can take, when there are so many other opportunities that are much more feasible and much more readily available than to try to be the star player of all time. So that's what I'd like people to focus on, is if you are involved in this business, don't abandon it, but how do you refocus that involvement, and how do you refocus the interest of those in sports, if they want to be in sports, to look at the other opportunities, although those are limited as well.
We're not starting at ground zero here. When I started writing sports in the stereotypically harsh Bedford-Stuyvesant section of Brooklyn, there were only 2 teams you could be on, either a boys' high school team or wear gang colors. Now it's boys and girls high school, and they have a debate team, and there are 100 public high school debate teams in New York City. And there are a lot of African-American boys on those debate teams, and they have their caps back, and they're wearing their baggy pants, but they're thinking about Johnny Cochran. They're not thinking about, Ken Griffey Jr. If that kind of excitement and energy, I mean, I don't know how you feel about people becoming lawyers, but it was set up just like a high school basketball tournament. There's a season, there are coaches, there's excitement, there's collective play and camaraderie. I mean, there's everything that you get in sports, with none of the physical bruises, only emotional bruises. And that looked like a very exciting kind of start for me. And there must be other things.
In the 13 colonies, there were white bond servants and African bond servants, and they shared an equal status. It wasn't until the advent of slavery that the white and African bond servants, or European and African bond servants, were no longer necessary. But in order to make sure that slavery worked, the white community had to be, by any means necessary, understand that they were superior and blacks were inferior. This was beaten into them, legislated into them, and of course they embraced it because otherwise they were themselves not well off. That is still with us today. So how do you change that is the real question. How do you change social responsibility on the part of African athletes, African American athletes? Well, first of all, they have to be socialized to that end, and that's not happening. And also, it's the great risk of newfound wealth and position in society, and no one's willing to risk that.
So I think we need to be real careful about, how we place athletes as impacting our communities in such a dramatic way, and I think we're trying to shift a lot of those responsibilities away from ourselves as parents and as responsible adults. I think we are the ones that they see every day, back and forth to work. They see an athlete play a game, they might see them make a presentation, but they don't see them on a daily basis. And I think that's where the character is being built, that's where the images, the real images, are being seen.
Some of the bigger name African American athletes are doing nothing any different from what Arnold Palmer, Jack Nicklaus, and others have done for years, that if you want to make as much money as possible, then don't be political, don't be racial, be this most positive image possible about how wonderful the world is and sports are, and I'm happy to have this opportunity, and don't rock the boat. That's the model for success. I mean, the Tiger Woods, the only thing that's new in the Tiger Woods model is this multiracial aspect is being brought out, that we can't identify the races in this guy, but that's for marketing purposes too, because we're coming into this new society where there are a lot of different people. We want you to be able to identify as broadly as possible. But if you are African American, it's probably not the most marketable route to go to focus on issues that are largely important for African Americans.
I just hope that people will see me as a well-rounded person who knew a little bit more than just hoops.
Stereotypes provide the language for global beliefs, which result in unjustified limitations on opportunity and freedom. Sport has disproved several racial stereotypes, but in this case, sport itself is used to create another myth, another stereotype, which is difficult for sport to address and show as misguided. Professor Hoberman argues that we can change racial stereotypes by changing the dominant images used in portraying African Americans. When we reject misleading images and demand better, stereotypes can be transformed. Professor Shropshire noted that he does not have a hoop dreams view of American opportunity, and that he prefers to widen the focus on sports opportunities to team ownership and marketing, in addition to playing. He notes that African Americans must look at opportunities both inside and outside sports and use their leverage for economic and social success. Dr. Jim Malone, professor at John Jay College in the City University of New York, argued that historically developed economic and legal restrictions built stereotypes of blacks, and that African American athletes risk their wealth and position when they directly challenge racial stereotypes. Robert Lipsyte, New York Times sports writer and author of 18 books, including Dick Gregory's autobiography and Free to be Muhammad Ali, asked how we might use the overwhelming interest of children in sports to our advantage. He suggests that by using sports to teach a wide range of academic activities, we may provide the means to a broader range of opportunities for more students. Leroy Selman emphasizes that parents should not rely on society to correct the message that their children receive about African American athletes. Parents have the responsibility and opportunity to fight the stereotypes. Kareem Abdull-Jabbar argues that if only more people understood the many ways that African Americans have made significant positive contributions to society throughout American history, then race relations in society would improve, because several stereotypes regarding African Americans would be shown to be false. He emphasized that since everyone faces forms of discrimination and bias, we all must learn to identify and fight it.
In the end, Kareem shared his personal wish that he wants us to know that he is a person who knows more than just hoops.
Issues of racial stereotyping and economic barriers is not simply an American problem, but it is a problem in America. Jackie Robinson, Arthur Ashe, and others have shown that race is not a reason to keep someone out of sports competition. We need to remind ourselves that people of all races enjoy successes in all areas of life, and that it is a mistake to stereotype any race by referencing only their most visible individuals.